Today I'm going to cover primarily what will be Module 3 from the program, although I've also I've taken about half from that and about half of just what I've learned as general good information and trying to help prevent a lot of the mistakes that we commonly see hardware startups making. So why are we here? Because it's really hard, and people have been saying this for a long time. It's almost impossible is kind of what I would say. It's even harder than people are talking about. There's a lot of reasons why. The nice balance to that is that there's a great upside, there's a great barrier to entry. So if you can do it right and figure out some of the key factors, there's really a great opportunity. So the OE has identified this need to educate startups and to show how to effectively go from prototype to scale. And it's really important because this is a part where startups often flounder in this step. Is you can make some great prototypes, looks really cool, good value proposition, getting from that to executing to getting to a sustainable business is really the valley of death is what we call it, for good reason. There's much more information online as part of this big program in this website, and we'll share this deck with you guys once we're done so you can find out where that is. To give a rough overview, these are the 7 modules, and Brandon is leading the charge here locally.
Yeah, so everybody, Brandon Cardwell. I run an innovation hub program based in Livermore called iGate. We run an incubator aimed predominantly at hardware startups. So we're actually moving into a new space. It's 9,000 square feet of kind of industrial lab space, 7,000 square feet of shared workspace. We also partner with 2 national labs in Livermore a lot. They co-founded our organization, which is how we got involved in this project. So the goal for DOE, as Greg said, is to help take inventors, innovators, entrepreneurs who have some sort of bench scale prototype that they know works, but may not have been designed to be manufactured at scale, and to help them not become manufacturing experts or contract manufacturers, but know enough to think about how their prototype might need to be modified to be able to be manufactured at scale. So material selection, process, design, all those sorts of things. So these modules have been developed with a slew of experts from industry, academia, all over from across the country. Our portion of it, in addition to this pilot for Module 3 that Greg's going to do today, is a resource library that we're building that will help people like you basically pop into the library and be able to find documents like template bill of materials, template NDA, things like that. So we're working on that as well. But we really want your candid feedback about the module today, not just the content itself, but also the delivery, because we're thinking about both sides of that. What is it that we want to provide entrepreneurs with in terms of the information, but also how do we want to provide it to them? So if this isn't the ideal format, if you'd rather, we're talking about self-paced learning, online stuff, we're talking about some more resource library, but also working with incubators and service providers who have some kind of expertise to put this information to the hands of the entrepreneurs who need it, and give them enough information that you don't shoot yourselves in the foot with choices that you make early in the prototype phase. So I'm going to stay for about 50 minutes. Greg knows how to get a hold of me too. I'm easy to find, so if you guys have any questions for me about our organization or about this or anything, feel free to reach out.
Yeah, does anyone have any questions now? We've got Brandon.
Joe?
So is this already online, or is it? This is very.
It's not yet. Yeah. So this is a pilot. So what we're doing right now, there are a series of pilots going on across the country right now. So we have what are sort of our edited final drafts of the module content, but that was mostly the somewhat organized brain dump of the people who owned that module development. And then, like I said, we're trying to figure out what's the best way to disseminate this information. Greg and I were just talking about this. We want to make sure this doesn't sort of go and live on a federal government website someplace and just decay and be obsolete in 2 years. So it's not online yet, but we are thinking about the best ways to do that. So definitely looking for feedback on that piece of it as well.
Okay, thanks.
It's a great, one thing that's really hard with hardware startups is it's so hard to find kind of an A to Z. You go to Google and you can spend 1,000 hours looking up quality information and you'd learn a lot, but you wouldn't really have a good step-by-step guide of how to approach it for a startup. So I think this is a great opportunity and effort here to make that happen. Any other questions about the program? All right, let's get into it. So, this is for you guys. It's made for you guys. It's all about you guys. So I want to make sure, one thing about this stuff, even this module 3 that we're going to talk about, there's so much to know and to learn and to figure out. And so I'm really covering basic ideas and theory and fundamental ways to approach it instead of getting into details, because if I did, most of those details would not be relevant to most of you guys. So what I'd like to do instead is open up discussions. I really encourage you to interrupt me, stop me if there's something that seems relevant that you want more information on. If you have questions about any terminology or what we're talking about, let's make this very interactive. And as such, why don't we go around first and let's introduce ourselves. And if you want to let us know who you are, your role, anything you feel comfortable sharing about the project you're working on, and what you would most like to learn, and what you think your biggest hurdles are to getting to scale. So.
Okay, my name is Travis Cox. I'm with my company. My little consulting practice is named Heraclitos Consulting Group. I founded it back in '92. So my work has been with companies of a medium to larger scale, companies that have already gone from nothing to something. And my interest in being here is to learn more about how a company goes from nothing to something. My primary background is in operations, enabling and improving operations, through technology. So that's what I'd like to learn most today, I think. And I don't know enough to say biggest hurdle to getting to scale yet.
Okay.
Okay.
So, about me, kind of serial entrepreneur, studied chemical engineering, got into China about 15 years ago, and as soon as I got there, just got off the plane and was wowed with the opportunities / problems that we were having. We were building exploding drills, screwdrivers that bent, all kinds of fun stuff that wasn't really supposed to happen. And we're very simple, seemingly very simple solutions. But we weren't doing a lot of the stuff that I'll talk about today, and that resulted in a lot of these issues. At that time, really only big business had gotten into China effectively, and they had paid millions, but even up to $1 billion to get in successfully and figure it out. And so we started Berkeley Sourcing Group to really facilitate startups to be able to compete at the same scale with those larger companies with their innovative ideas cost effectively. So in the last 12 years, I've worked with over 900 startups doing that. And I live about a third of the time in China and have been going to the factories and really developed a passion for helping hardware startups succeed. And we've seen, out of those 900, there aren't nearly as many success stories as I would have liked, and see kind of the common themes. And so we're really focused on trying to solve some of those problems. As such, we started doing more events, and first running meetups here in Berkeley, and then globally, Tokyo, Shenzhen, Hong Kong, and had a real, I kind of got pulled in kicking and screaming to doing events initially, and ended up really enjoying it. And so we started a global community, Hardware Massive, which really launched last January with the mission to empower hardware startups to succeed through education, networking, and access to resources. Today we have 30 chapters, I think. We started at 4 last January, we're at 30. I think we're confidently say we're the #1 global hardware startup focused community. We focus on live events where we have these face-to-face meetings, usually in the evenings, and then we have a lot of online resources. We have a huge video library, all this stuff I'll talk about today, and a lot more, and a lot of expert articles. We're always looking for speakers and content and ways to improve that community. So if you want to contribute or be a part of it, we'd love to have you at another event. HardwareCon is kind of the culmination of that in one big event. So we do HardwareCon every year. We're going into our 4th year, which will be, we're going to do it in the San Jose Convention Center next April 20th. And we're looking to have about 1,000 attendees. It's an expo. It's we'll have one breakout session, which will be kind of A to Z from ideation to fulfillment and every step in between. With a lot of experts covering those, and then we'll have we have panels which cover the main industries: robotics, AR, VR, health, medtech, so forth. And it's really a place where it's all very hardware startup focused, and again, trying to bring more light to the unique strategy of taking these businesses to market. So today, I want to give a few main ideas here that I'd love you to come away with at the end of the day. So one is that most hardware companies are they're founded by engineers, they're driven by engineers, and engineers are very product focused. Right? And we think if we make a great product, we will have a great business. A great product is maybe 5% of your business. It's really, in hardware, it's really just a tiny fraction of representing the hurdles that you need to overcome to make a sustainable business. So that's the starting point. You need to have a great product to get to the next stages, but it's just the starting point, and you really need to look at it as that stepping stone to all of these other things that you'll need to do effectively to get to sustainability. So when you're looking at the business, you really need to try to take yourself out of that engineering mentality and put yourself in the business mentality. And every decision about technology needs to be a decision about your business, not about the technology itself. We'll focus a lot on learning how to understand and calculate your market feasibility. Probably the number one reason that hardware startups fail is they don't have quite the right product market fit. So looking at how do you understand that, how do you get out there and measure that. A key one too is that quality in manufacturing terms is really defined as acceptable product. It's not a measure of the dictionary version of general goodness of something, but it is qualified, it is quality if it meets the accepted standards. It is not quality, it is defective if it does not. And that's a really important way to look at it, because you're going to build all of your specs and your design around first defining what is acceptable and then trying to achieve that. The other thing too is that if you can get to sustainability as a hardware company, you're in the top 1%. And once you can get there, you will have learned a ton in that process. You will have built a team that could do that. You will have a lot of relationships that you can leverage. You will likely be able to raise more money. You'll be in a very different situation than before you reach that point. So it's very easy to think of all the details. How can I save a little bit of money there, or how can I do this other thing a little bit better? What you really want to focus on as a startup initially as a hardware startup is trying to keep it as simple as possible. Cut out everything that is unnecessary, get to that sustainability point, and then leverage everything that you've done to get there to find cost reductions, improve your market, and scale beyond that. As much as possible, get it right early. I'm contradicting myself here almost immediately in the first slide. So you'll see a little bit of this. There's a lot going on. It's a balancing factor, and then this is why it needs to be. All of these things need to be business decisions, right? But certainly, the more that you can define your product for manufacturing, the more you can figure out your materials and processes and tolerances early, you you will save a lot of money in the long term if you can do that well. So it's this interesting balance of trying to get to that almost starting line of sustainability combined with working very efficiently and effectively to get as much of this design for manufacturing and early stage stuff done to prepare for those next steps. So marketing feasibility.
Excuse me, Greg, can I ask you, you said safety, are you talking about business safety, product safety?
Products, well, all of that, yeah, product and personal safety, you know, but yeah, so, I think actually look at the slide. So one thing with hardware that is very difficult is creating a safe product, because, and we'll talk more about this later, but it's, often it's very hard to measure in the product as it leaves the warehouse or the factory, because it's the things you didn't foresee in the design that typically hurt people. And so when you measure it, it passes, it's not an effective product. You get it out the door and somebody uses it in a way that we didn't expect, or too much power, battery explodes, something like that. So that is the trickier part of this design for manufacturing.
But let's back up to the quality question, right? You didn't have an acceptable design to start with, and that's how you got into a safety.
Yeah, and if you weren't not having given enough thought or good enough thought about what could possibly go wrong.
Right.
Safety and reliability is really tricky, because you can make acceptable products, and it's hard to. They're usually caused by environmental factors or use cases.
You're under the gun to hit a milestone or something, and you're cutting corners trying to get the product to at least show well. Right.
Yeah. Or it's hard to think of how a kid jumped on it and that made a little crack, and that causes other things.
Right.
So really trying to look at what can fail. Usually certain things in the product will fail first, I guess, fundamentally. So if you focus on those things, if you're aware of those things, and really try to extrapolate how those could fail in a hazardous way, then you can cover yourself pretty well.
So just to make sure I'm following, so the ramifications of that has to do with the fact that you spend all this money ahead of time, early on, you develop the product, you got maybe some low production quantity, you released it to the market, and all of a sudden now you're having to recover all these returns or whatever, maybe lawsuits, et cetera. So the cost of all of that damage, if you will,
It pretty much outdates.
devastates your business.
If you're a consumer product, the retailers will no longer work with you, right? You now have to recall all that product, build all that product, get it into your customers' hands. That's 4 months, 5 months often. It blows up your lead time, your cycle. If it happens early stage, you're pretty much done. Most likely, it's probably better to let you go over to open as a new company and figure out a slightly new product. If it happens a little later stage, or maybe with an industrial product, or you might have an understanding customer, then maybe you have more options there potentially. Safety is really, really, really important for good reason.
One other clarifying question. So you had said, point about product market fit is the number one reason why startups fail. Definitely agree, and I've seen that. But then you also know the product is only a small part. So just to kind of clarify, it sounds like you want to develop a product that you validated has a need in the market. But once you've done that, don't focus so much on how can we make the product incrementally better as much as focus on how do we actually make this a successful business. Is that, I just wanted to.
Absolutely. So first is value proposition.
Yeah.
Right. You find the pain point. What is your value proposition? The second is product market fit.
Yeah.
Who's going to buy it?
Yeah.
For what cost? And once you figure that out, now you understand market feasibility. Now you know, hey, if I make these, there's enough of these kind of people who pay this kind of
Yeah,
price
yeah.
where I can survive. And once you can answer yes to that question, then you can focus on cost reduction and scalability and having all these other guidelines, right? So,
Which really can be full of many, many problems and headaches that really require a lot of focus.
yeah.
Okay.
So we'll add a good bit of clarity here. So yeah, the main tenet is who's going to buy what and at what price, right? And to me, this is what market feasibility really comes down to. If you can answer this question and the answer is a revenue, rough profit model that makes you a sustainable or better business, then you're doing well. You're on the right path. But you need to know very clearly who is that customer, right? Where do they live? How old are they? What do they like? Why do they like it? You need to be intimately connected to your potential customers. We're going to talk about the basics of fixed and variable costs and how they vary. And we're going to go through some real-world thought processes, an example of how we get there and how you try to make sense of all this jumbled and seemingly somewhat contradictory information. So again, why this is really important is that many hardware startups are very focused on the technical aspects, but are not really, but there's just so much to know when it comes to taking that to scale that you need to take all these other engineering challenges into consideration, and you really need more devoted experts typically. The basic understanding of, we'll go through the basic understanding of how these products are engineered to avoid these critical mistakes early in the process. Some of the common mistakes and misconceptions, designing a product that is too complex. If you can make a simple product that will get you to market and make you sustainable and get that revenue in, again, you're going to learn a lot through that process. You can always make your product more complex. That is no problem. You can add more features, you can add more bells and whistles. If people are willing to buy it and willing, and that can make you sustainable, focus on that first. Try to keep it as simple as you can. Because of the complexity, there's a few ways to price a product. One is looking at your manufacturer cost and seeing what your margins need to be. If you design a product and say, hey, this needs to be my product without really consulting the market and having a good feedback, then you multiply that by your 4x or whatever it needs to be in your market, and you often will price yourself out of what people are willing to pay. So you need to look at it a little bit of both ways, both the bottom up of manufacturer costs into your end user price. But once you have that, you also need to confirm that people are really willing to pay that.
Excuse me, Greg. So your point about due to high cost of production, but there's lots of other, maybe you can cover, lots of other costs that go into it other than just production costs.
Yeah.
And so is your second point really only dealing with production costs, or is it talking about the total cost of ownership?
Yeah. So this I took direct from module. I'm trying to also get feedback on that, but I think this is really talking about production costs, and that if you make things more complex, you have too many components, you have too high a fixed cost to tooling. It's very easy to over-engineer a product into something that is too expensive for the market, right? And a common problem with startups is that because we're engineers, we love to make them perfect. We love to make all the bells and whistles and make it really elegant. And that may make a great product, but if your price point is $99 or $999 and that puts you 40% higher, that could be a non-starter.
So I guess where I was coming from the question, it reminds me of, this is obviously an ongoing concern already, but a company I was working with moved one of their vendors, the chain vendors, and moved to more inland, not China, different country, but moved it more inland, moved their business, production, more inland for cheaper production costs. But the actual transportation cost to get it to port increased it to a level, you know, and they didn't think that through, right? So that's why where I was coming from in my questions.
Yeah, no, there are a lot of, I'd say that's definitely another big one for startups. They don't usually have that problem so much exactly, but certainly duties are something that many startups are not aware of. Packaging costs. There are lots of other costs that you need to consider within the whole framework. It's a little bit outside of what I'm talking about today, but very good point. You know, there are a lot of costs, and you really need to look at your land costs with your warehouse and packaging and all that. So this failing to understand the intimate understanding of manufacturing costs and the time in order to optimize a scaling strategy, right? So this takes a lot of time and effort. It takes a lot of work to go from that prototype to that final optimized production run. Just fundamentally respect that. Give that the lead time it takes and give it the budget it takes in your business plan. It's often very underestimated, and if you run out of money and you're 80% of the way there, it can be very hard to raise extra funds. So add some cushion both in time and money. Again, kind of covering the insufficient understanding of the market and the customer expectations. Get connected to your customer early and often, right? Get their feedback, know what they want, know who they are, know why they're going to buy the product, or why not. So some of the best practices, so reducing complexity before making these critical investments. One thing about manufacturing is that it's very hard to go back. A lot of our startup models are based around software where it's very agile, and these models are really failing when it comes to hardware because hardware is the opposite of agile. Tools are very expensive. It takes a long time to train people, to get people up to speed in assembly and quality control. And every design change you make, it has a domino effect of time, energy, that you want to limit that as much as you can. Try to reduce those product costs before launch. Allowing for this introduction at the appropriate price point. This is from the Build4Scale module. I would maybe phrase this a little bit differently and say add an extra margin in the beginning. Add in some cushion. It is much better to fail because you're a bit overpriced before you get into your big manufacturing costs than to live on a margin. If you're living on that edge, then when anything goes wrong, and it likely will, then you're going to be in real trouble. But if you can get that feedback, potentially through crowdfunding or through other vehicles where the market tells you, hey, this is just too expensive right now that I'm not willing to pay for it, go back, try to work out a slightly different model. But as a startup, you cannot compete on price. Big companies will always win that game. You need to compete on innovation. And competing on innovation means that you should be able to have a higher price point, a higher margin. And if you're not able to, and you're trying to then rework your strategy to be able to compete on price and find those nickels and dimes within the process, then it's usually a very difficult strategy. Very similar in that vein, assess your product costs and make sure that you have healthy margins. Obtain an intimate strategy of your manufacturing costs and take time to optimize the scaling strategy. And understand, oh, okay, some of this stuff. Sorry about that. So the real question, who's going to buy this at what price and what product? You know, there's, when you have a value proposition, I kind of said product is only 5%, but most people consider the value proposition and the product the same thing, but they can be very different. And one value proposition can potentially make a whole spectrum of potential products. And finding which product that is, especially to start with, and making that fit with the right customers in the right market and the right price point, this is really the magic of product market fit and really market feasibility. So connect with those customers early and often. When you have an idea, when you have a working prototype, get out there, get in front of people, see their reactions. One trick, here's a little trick with pricing strategy. So when we do surveys, we often ask what price would you expect this to be, or these general questions. And if you ask these questions, you'll get potentially a huge range of answers that are really hard to make sense of. And a lot of them just won't be reasonable at all. So a good way to ask this question that can really create boundaries is, what is the least that you would expect this product to cost? What is the most you would be willing to pay for this product? And what do you think this product should cost? And you can ask all three to one person, you can split them up, you can do some ABC type testing. What will happen is that usually what is the least amount this product will cost? Those results will all be bunched up a bit. And what is the most will all be bunched up a bit. And generally the answer will kind of be in the middle. And it may not actually be very reflective of what people say they expect the product to cost, ironically. But having those boundary conditions will give you a much better idea of what the pricing.
So I want to make sure I'm following. You're talking about the sales price.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Okay, so keeping this fairly simple, but also very important concept of fixed costs versus variable costs. Again, I left a lot of the details out of this. I don't think they work very well in a presentation format. I'm going to focus more on the strategy and the theory than getting into the finer points, which you can go online and see. But fundamentally, the fixed costs are the costs independent of producing one more unit. So in manufacturing, probably the most common is purchasing the factory or purchasing a tool or purchasing a fixture. In order to make one unit, you really need to establish that baseline. And then the variable cost is the cost of making that one extra unit. So any cost associated with producing one more unit. So very simple kind of curve. You're going to hit this baseline where you're going to have to raise this much money just to get started, and then the more you make, obviously those costs will go up in somewhat linear fashion. Yeah, we'll look at some of these. So fixed costs do not change as the output varies in the short run. In the long term, it can. You can buy more tools, you can buy another factory and so forth, but at least in the short run, these fixed costs do not change. And so they have you a little bit handcuffed, right? You're bought in, there's no going back. This is why you want to try to get this stuff right in the beginning. The fixed costs must be paid at whatever level of sales are achieved. So if you have an overestimate of your sales, then you may not be able to pay back those fixed costs potentially. And then the higher the fixed costs, obviously, the more sales you need to make in order to hit a break-even point. Some of the examples of merchandising companies, so their fixed costs or variable costs are mostly in the cost of goods sold. Manufacturing companies go down a little bit deeper as far as direct materials, direct labor, and variable overhead. Some of them are common between each other, which is shipping, if you are offering commissions, the invoices related to sales, and service companies are a bit more service related, and they're really focused more on supplies, travel expenses, and everything. So I didn't go into this too much because it's a little bit focused more on your businesses, but for your businesses, if you guys have any questions on how that might work, these are important also for accounting. Taxes are associated differently with fixed costs and with variable costs. Fixed costs are more depreciation, and so forth. So it's, once you get down into those details, it becomes simpler to understand.
So the reason I was going to ask a question, and that is, for one and only startup I ever worked with, one of the things that, in my opinion, they caused them to fail is that this is a rather classical model of fixed and variable costs. And so what they did is they costed they were internally produced, so it might be different if they're subcontracting work or something, but they costed their product based upon a per unit number of hours of a labor rate, paying the person so much money per hour. And what they failed to realize is that in order to get the level of production out that they wanted to get out, they had to hire 3 or 4 assembly people. And so my opinion since that point in time has always been that labor, while we call it in these models direct labor is variable, the reality is it's a fixed cost within a relative range of product production.
Yeah.
So when you hire that 4th person, you're going to pay that salary and benefit for as long as they're there, regardless of whether you're producing more parts or not.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Perfect segue.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you. That's sometimes it's not very clear. Absolutely. If you're hiring one more person, he's going to make a lot more than one unit. But it is relative to kind of your immediate production needs. So they in the module they've defined this, this semi-variable, and these can go back and forth, right? If you're an example, even factories potentially, if you're working in kind of a space like this, maybe you can rent one more desk or one more space for one more machine. Even the rent for the factory can become a variable cost. So the key is really to understand the fundamental theory of how this works, so that you're stuck with the fixed costs. You're gonna pay for them, and they're gonna be there. They're gonna be on your balance sheet and in your finances. For at least the relatively near 6-12-month future and beyond. The variable costs are the things that, hey, if sales don't go as well, then you can cut them back. And you can save your business by cutting some of those back. Or if sales go great, hey, you can bump them up and you can quickly ramp up to meet demand. But fixed costs, it's hard to buy a factory and buy the tools and get everyone trained before Christmas, potentially, or before the time you would need to meet that sales demand. So it's a really important concept in general in business, in these businesses, but beyond, you just really need to apply that to your own business and see how that works. And it can be very different. Let's go into an example. So this is a fun one. So this is Throw Motion. This is a client of ours. They made the world's first live action game with a throwing mechanism. So think foosball, but this game was built for cricket. And it was also the world's first IoT live action game. So there's a bunch of sensors around here connected to a tablet. tablet is connected to the cloud. You can keep score globally. You can have tournaments. It has a great little interface of when you score. It has a live announcer, basically. You really feel like you're in the cricket stadium and they're announcing your game. This is the bowler, basically a pitcher. He throws the ball, the batter hits the wall. There's a sensor on the wicket. If it's a wicket, you get out. There's sensors all over to measure how quickly you hit the ball, to measure how many runs you score, and so forth. So, Vidyan, PhD, NASA engineer from Stanford, super smart guy, built this in his, built a prototype in his garage. And as impressive as this overall is, the really cool thing that he did was he made it playable. He made it fun. And that was really his value proposition, is that he worked out the physics of the timing and the dimensions of the bowler and the bat and the ball and the spacing and kind of the bouncing. And so that was really his value proposition. Now there's a number of ways you can go with this, depending on the design and the cost and so forth. And so, first looking at this as a market feasibility question, right? I want to open this up to our discussion. How do you answer the who, what product, and what price of this fundamental value proposition? Where would you start?
I think you would look at where you have foosball tables, where you have other types of, in terms of the who, where you have other types of games. And foosball is probably the best example, but you could argue air hockey would be similar. You may also want to condense that a little bit. And specifically, this is cricket, so you could argue in America, most people don't know what cricket is. So they might not specifically be interested in cricket, but in the long term, they could be interested in a game that's like this for baseball. So that's how I would start. If there's a way to figure out what are the sales of some of the more public companies that are already selling the more live action arcade games. That might be the in terms of what product, what price. The price, you're probably going to have to do some customer validation to figure out this has much more technology and will have a better in-game experience than just a foosball table. But are individuals willing to pay more to get the product, or are there ways that buying the product is the same price, but when you use it, you can get a share of revenue that way. But I think that piece, in terms of what price might be, maybe what product might be more just some data, but more customer validation, actually going to some bars, going to some arcade shops or arcades, and just talking to them, and trying to understand. And maybe just looking overall what's their budget for arcade games. That's really just, they're typically restaurants, they're typically food service establishments. There's probably a whole host of things that they have to worry about. Maybe this is something every year they just buy a new game. Or we spot whatever we thought was cool at the time and moved on.
There's all great points. Any other thoughts?
I think this is one of those that's interesting to look at, and you touched on this from the perspective of, or you said a startup can't compete on price, you have to compete on innovation. Considering that there's still an array of options for the potential consumer of this, including do nothing, doing what you're always doing, do you have to drive the price point on something like this down to the level of what already exists in the market to be able to actually sell it? Because the establishment is doing fine. You're not solving a burning pain point of the establishment with something like this. They're already making money on their hockey and baseball and that kind of stuff. So can you actually monetize the innovation that's embedded in the product, at least commensurate with the additional cost that will incur not having economies of scale in manufacturing?
Yeah. There's also a bit, to your point, Brandon, there's also a bit of education. Having to educate the customer, the buyer of the hardware, why this is better. And then I could think that some folks might look at this and say, yeah, but how can I really tie increased revenue to the promotion rather than I was running a promotion for happy hour.
If the game is a pay per play, then you can do that pretty directly.
Yeah.
If it was not, if it was just trying to track some overall, like, am I drawing more people in?
Exactly.
It's a much harder value proposition. One way you could deal with that is to actually embed one, if you had one, in the environment for a little while to see how people respond to it. But still, you're trying to get to that functional prototype. And this is one of the challenges, and right now we're talking about a game and a consumer product, but this is true for we've seen a lot in real technical challenges. It's just something is X% better than the current state of the art and costs Y% more to make, and that's the balance of it doesn't matter. Maybe the thing you're doing is 20% more efficient, but does that 20% matter to anybody? And is it worth the 30% cost increase that you'll have for making it and selling it to somebody else?
Yeah, and I think, this is, as far as the stuff we work with, I thought this was a really, maybe the most applicable or similarly applicable to that, because it's a big question. You really don't know. And you don't really know until almost you get people to commit to buying. If they say, people see the technology or the game, wow, this is great. Okay, great, it's $3,000. No way, right? Or great, I'll buy one. Okay, here's one. Oh, wait, no, just kidding.
So another thing to throw in here as a discussion point, since we're talking about startups, is your business model matters a lot too in this case. Because maybe a $3,000 initial purchase price for somebody who owns a pub, in London is a non-starter, but some sort of lease or rev share model that's subscription oriented, where it reduces the risk for the buyer. Say, well, we'll put this here, and we're going to take 30% of the profit, and you keep 70%. It's all upside for you, except the floor space you lose. That matters a lot. How the business model intersects with the cost.
Totally. And it kind of in that what price really you can kind of account for that. Hey, I'll pay $1 to play it once. Yeah. Right. And then so that's your product, a one-time play. It's really a totally different way of looking at the whole venture, right? So absolutely. So those are all great suggestions. And so here we're basically, looking at what was kind of feasible. Here was really what the options were. Is that you could go with a high end and make something like this, where it was going to be top notch, only maybe bars that were really interested or very wealthy individuals would be able to afford it. You could try to go with something that would be a little bit mid-range, that would not include the table and be pretty bare bones, but still basically this kind of concept. Or you could go just with a plastic, Hasbro kind of game that kids would play. It'd still be probably $100 because it'd be a lot of parts. It would still have this value proposition, and it could still have some of these physics and this playability in it. And so his prototypes were quite nice, and so he took those and he gave them to the Google campus, Facebook, a few of these other folks, and then he just went there and he just started seeing how were they used, who was playing them, what did they say, and surprise, surprise, it was like all the Indian guys. Because I'm still not convinced that cricket is fun.
This also take 5 days.
Cricket's the 5-day match. Yeah, we do a cricket match.
What impact did it have on productivity?
I went to one in New Zealand, and it was fun because New Zealanders are just a riot, and they're all drinking. And so it seemed like nobody was watching them match. But I still didn't quite get it. So then, looking at the market, right? Basically the potential markets were Commonwealth countries, and by far the most populous Commonwealth country that was interested in cricket was India. So looking more specifically at the Indian market, huge disparity of wealth, right? So basically the opportunity for the $800 game, totally out. There's no middle class to buy that kind of game. So you have a potential children's toy, or you have more of the foosball pool, kind of similar channels there. And then, kind of the box seats at the cricket matches or these kind of special kind of places. and you're really looking into it more, even in children's toys, there's just not enough volume for people to buy, $100 game. So really the medium and low were pretty quickly, given what he was working with. So, okay, so now that you're gonna make a game that sells for about $3,000 or something like that, how do you make it? Right? You have a number of technologies that you can use to make basically this exact thing, right? You can make the legs out of metal or wood, you can make the board out of plastic or metal or wood, you can injection mold or compression mold, or you have all of these technologies. So what do you do? How do you approach this problem? You made a great prototype, people like it, it's a lot of fun. They're kind of giving you the variables that you're playing with here, right? Injection molding, huge tooling costs. The initial quotes for his initial design were about $150,000 for tooling costs. CNC, almost no tooling costs, but very high per piece cost, right? Vacuum forming was nice, but very rudimentary. It's not going to work for any of the finer features, certainly. You've got compression molding with metal, so.
CNC stands for, sorry.
Computer numerically control.
Milling.
Milling, okay.
It's a milling.
Milling, yeah.
But I guess you'd have to determine what the quality is going to be. Putting out a $3,000 product, you're not going to go with that. Probably going to want someone to get that detail and solve it for them.
Yeah, and this is a place where you can really quickly lose sight of product market fit, and because you're chasing those costs. You say, okay, well, I can do vacuum forming. Yeah, but not if that's not what your customer actually wants to buy. Like, so you had a prototype that people responded to really well. What was the feedback on that prototype? If you made it really nice, like this one, then you run a risk if you downgrade the quality that people won't respond as well to your finished product as the prototype, which is not really what you want. And if you had a lower quality prototype that people said, yeah, this is really fun and functional, but looks kind of crappy, then maybe you need to upgrade a little bit to that. So you have to keep in mind the product market fit aspect of that and not just chase lowest cost.
Absolutely.
I think I'm following everything Brandon just said, but isn't there also a consideration around how confident are we in our first design? In other words, we're going to pay the high fixed cost for injection molding, for example, which will fit the model I think Brandon was saying. I have to be very confident, or I'm going to repay that tooling cost if I need to make a change. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely.
You also need to know how large that market is going to be. Is it worth the investment in the high fixed costs like injection molding? Or if I know that my total market's going to be a few hundred of these in the first year, does it make sense to go something that's a higher variable cost until I get total confidence not only in my design but in the size of the market that's going to adopt it in this iteration?
Okay.
And then you have the issue of customers are seeing, let's say you're going to make the first ones out of wood. They see the wood ones and go, oh, I want to get one. Then you go to injection mold and it's plastic. So that's a trade-off too.
So what do you think? You're the boss, right? You have to make a decision at some point, and these are your variables. So
one of the things and I know that this is a canned presentation that you're working through, but I don't hear anything about the fight with the investor, right? And so you say it in some ways, but I mean, most of what I've seen is you need to produce a 5-year model that's going to show them ROI and all these kind of things. And so these are all some of the elements to it, but you really have to be a salesperson to convince your investors that you have all these things worked out, and then you have to project out on some level so that they know, because their return is not going to be next year or 2 years, it's going to be 5 years.
Actually, what I'll show, I think, is that this is exactly what you need to do. And this is the answer to your question. It's the fight with the investors, and it's the proof to them that one, you have a plan to make money, and two, you know how you're gonna do that from the design and manufacturing standpoint. So and number one, right, sustainability, right? So this stuff is all a big mix of stuff, right? So step back and look at how am I gonna be sustainable, right? How am I gonna sell this product?
The investor discussion is really interesting because not all companies get investors. I know here in the Bay, that's pretty common and maybe preferable depending on what you're doing. I mean, if you have a high capital cost company like an energy hardware startup or something, it can be really useful because then you can actually sink the money into the high fixed costs injection molding product and get your tooling done. But you know, whether you have investors or don't have investors seems like it could also be a strong influencer in what you do at this phase.
Yeah.
Is that your experience?
Absolutely. Yeah, totally. As you know,
Trying to like penetrate a market, bootstrapping, and you know you got your second mortgage on your house, and that's all the capital you have to work with.
Yeah.
And you have to think about how you can sort of incrementally get into the market with enough margin to be able to. It's still sustainability oriented, but in the investor-driven company, you can J-curve it for a little while and lose a bunch of money as long as the ultimate market that you think you can serve is high margin enough and big enough to return capital.
yeah,
So it's a totally different calculus.
totally. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So very good point. So bootstrapping, totally different model, right? Bootstrapping, you are just trying to survive and take one step in front of the other and get to that next sale and pay off last month's bills and
Right.
keep that going. Investment, you're trying to blow money as fast as you can to get to that next level of investment, where they invest you and you look at scale. And so that is very true. Still though, I would argue both want to see sustainability, right?
Yeah.
Investors, more than anything, they want to see sales. And they want to see that those sales can pay your bills and can, you're going to raise a lot more money and you're going to blow it before you ever pay back what you owe. But the idea is that the first step is always to make a product and sell it and show that people will buy it, and that you can get to that point in manufacturing.
So I have another question.
Yeah.
So is a timeline, time to market, a strong consideration? It's always a consideration, but is it a strong consideration in this particular market? And the reason I asked that question is you made the point earlier about getting it right the first time. We've also already talked about the fact that it's a high-end product. We want to make sure it has the image that's necessary in the first rollout. And that injection molding and high fixed cost. So if we spent the time to make sure that we're very confident in our design,
Yeah.
and thus we're willing to spend money for injection molding, for example.
Yeah.
Also, what Brandon's point is, we want to amortize that cost over a sufficient number of units. But if we were willing to invest it, that seems to me that it would extend the timeline to be very confident in the design before we invested in the tooling.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. And I don't think there's an exact right or wrong answer here. He was more bootstrapped, so he was definitely pushed away from the high injection molding costs, certainly. Although, as I look at this equation, I would not be very confident because things in startups change daily. Your customer, especially if you haven't had any product out to the market yet, you're going to learn so much. Just by getting there, people just start giving you all the answers. Right? Your customer tells you what product they want, they tell you what they're willing to pay, they tell you where they buy it.
You don't know what you don't know.
When you get into manufacturing, the things that are breaking tell you what's wrong with the design, the quality problems, or where the costs are going. Without doing a tremendous amount of work that it would take to foresee all of that, all of the answers are kind of given to you once you get to that stage of manufacturing production runs and getting them out to market. So this is where, just in my experience, that when I look at these big, hairy beasts, these problems, it's how can I get to market in a way that it's still got to be a production run. You've got to get to that manufacturing type of technology, but if you can get there with as few fixed costs as possible, get all those answers, plug them back in, and let everyone else do the work. Let the market, let the results from the factory, let all of that stuff do that really hard work for you as much as possible. And then you're going to be, where you are, where he is right now versus where he is when he gets to that point. He's in a totally different position. He's got a bigger team. He's got a lot more partners. He's in touch with a lot more experts. He's got a lot more feedback from customers. So he's, even if nothing else changed, he's in a much better position to handle those problems. If he can get there, which most people don't. Right? That's the other thing is that, see, that's the value of that. Where most people don't make it through. So, have to give a lot of respect to that. So what did he do? So he chose this high-end model. He made these alpha prototypes initially in his garage. One thing that was really great decision that he made was he modularized the two hardest parts, the bowler and the batter. And these guys, the batter has a lot of degrees of freedom. The bowler mechanics were simpler but still complex. And how he designed these originally was for CNC, and going from that to injection molding, that's a different design. Those CNC is a subtractive process. Injection molding, you have most issues of how do you open mold, shrinkage and everything. So what that allowed him to do was to make some of the more common and expensive parts for that could be made out of plastic into injection, while keeping most of it still CNC. So he kept his tooling costs limited, but he was able to reduce the total cost of it. And he could just balance what he had available versus what the cost reduction would be. He focused on the parts that were, there were more than one component per unit, obviously, where you see the most savings. So one was vacuum forming for the gutters. So that very simple, didn't need any particularly precise process for that. So that saved some good money. The next thing he did was compression molding for the fielders. So these are big fielders. They would cost a ton to CNC. So he made them out of silicone that actually helped the grip a little bit. Made a very quality looking product, and it saved him the cost of production. And he got the product out to market. And what he's doing now is he's iteratively moving into more and more tooling. So he's in a lot of respect for how much work he's done. Right? He is redesigning almost the whole product each time he goes into his next production run. He has to go back and re-engineer for the new tools and the new design. And when you change one part, it always affects a lot more. That's why this modularization was a big help, because it really limited the effect that the one design change had in the more complex parts. But totally new financial model, right? And this is what, if you can show that to an investor and say, hey, look, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to get to market. I'm going to make some money. I'm going to raise some more money, and then I'm going to injection mold these parts, and this is going to be my cost. And if you can get down to that kind of detail, and he pretty much did, you're gonna be showing a lot more understanding of the process and the product and the market than most hardware startups are coming to those investors with.
So it strikes me, Greg, that for this kind of product, there must be a great deal of cost involved in servicing this product when it fails in whatever way. Is that like,
You know, we expected so, and let me find some wood to knock out. It's been holding up amazingly well.
so he can, it keeps running, but he's giving us feedback about how to design the next one better, but the ones that are out in the field are still performing, no major rework, so to speak.
It's still fairly new. It's about 100 out the field right now, so not huge numbers, but yeah, I mean, really kudos to him. I'm very proud of our team. That fundamentally nothing is really broken, so there are a couple little things that are pretty good fits.
Are there any opportunities for upsell in terms of holding tournaments or having, I see that there's a whole, once you get to critical mass, I guess that's the key, right? You don't have critical mass, but this idea of being able to have tournaments across, this isn't the kind of thing you can just have a computer program and everyone competes, almost like play chess online. At least I would say the experience is probably really a lot less fun without having the hardware. But are there opportunities to explore around ways to have upsell, rev share with bars that install this, and where they might pay up front $3,000 and then say, oh, but as we host these tournaments, we're charging a little bit to enter, we get half of that or get 3/4 of that.
Absolutely. You know, he's focused on that and thought about that. You're right on that the critical mass is not quite there yet. But there are, I mean, you see that they have leaderboards and things, and you see the number of runs played. And, you know, I lost track of 100,000 many years ago, I guess. But some people, when they get into it, they get really into it. You know, that's an exciting feature. You know, the pay-per-play is definitely a model he's looking at. Sponsorship, you know, Coke and Sprite, like wanting to present these at cricket, big cricket matches, stuff like that. So again, once it got in there, once it's gotten in now, famous cricket people are talking to him, Coke and Sprite, and other folks are, and everything just kind of starts to happen. But he can't get there until we've got products in the field and people are playing it.
They realize it's reliable, it works, it's fun.
His website says there's over 2 million scored. He's working on the foosball and the baseball version.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Exactly. I wasn't sure how much I could share, but hey, it's on the website. So that's the other thing too, right? Now he's shown kind of a proven product, and now foosball and baseball. Yeah, apparently the baseball one kind of works. I haven't seen it yet, but that's a pretty amazing challenge. So the main takeaways here. So, you can see with one particular value proposition, one thing, you're selling the value proposition fundamentally, right? But even with that very clear value proposition, there were so many technologies and products that could come out of that were critical to him creating a successful business and that had almost nothing to do with that value proposition itself, as long as he kept it intact.
So did he bootstrap or did he get investment?
He bootstraps. I believe. I think he might have gotten a little investment, but he had a good bit of savings, I think, from his work at the lab consulting. There's all these variables. It gets really, really hectic. You need to put them down on paper. You need to understand them. You need to calculate them. They're going to change all the time. You're going to have to try to keep up with it. But also, we do try to keep it simple, and that's where looking at sustainability can help you make sense of it all. He had this design, but it was adapting all the time. And I swear we never make the same product twice. It feels like that. I wish we could. But customers will always tell you what they want. You always want to improve things a little bit, so there's always going to be these little changes. As much effort as you put into getting it all right in the beginning and for launch, it's going to change for various reasons. We prepared for that. So each time they changed, he had to redo the whole design, the whole model, financial model really to match that. And these were very independent of that product idea that we started with. Any last questions from Mission? Do you find that a useful example for market feasibility?
I think so. I think it's easy to relate to in that this is a type of product that we all probably play football at least once or twice, if not been to an arcade, play a game. So I think it's easy to relate to it, and then I think the way you laid out the three options was also really useful to think about, because even if whatever product any of us is trying to bring to the market, or anyone else trying to bring to the market, I think bounding it by where are the potential places we could sell this. And I put my product manager hat on and say, yeah, that's exactly how you should think about it. It's a software product. You have technology, you're trying to find a problem, maybe there's multiple problems that you can solve. But within that, bound who you're selling to, how much you're selling to them, within those categories. So I think that the piece that you're adding here, which is new to me, but it's very illustrative, this becomes illustrative, is that you have to figure out all the hardware costs that go into the highest product, the middle, the road product is the low product. So I think the example is useful. Maybe being a consumer product helps.
Right.
Relate to
Yeah,
that.
exactly. I think the consumer product that allows us all to relate to it. I mean, my initial skepticism is I've never seen anything like this survive a bar environment. But he took a totally different approach and went to the high-tech companies where he's got a different clientele. And so, and then looking at the website, I can see he's actually making progress and he's doing stuff. And so it's a great example and something to follow up on. So you might even add his web address on it just to show people. And then go look at the product. I mean, the whole thing, this kind of stuff tends to always be broke, right? It's always sitting in there dead, and then no one will touch it because it's always broke. And so if he's able to keep that reliability issue from propping up on it, he can really make some headway, I'm sure.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think it addresses the what are we selling food in the street, very different markets, and then at what price, and price points. It illustrates how, in answering that question, how you determine how you manufacture, what you manufacture,
There's a process, It seems like a big mess, but there's kind of at least a start and an end.
Well, that's where the extra cash is, right? If you figure out a new way to do the process, if you can pull something off that nobody's done before. I mean, there's also the innovation of the product, but there's the innovation of how you pull it off and get it to market. And so the idea of going out and dumping off the betas and high-tech companies is a totally different way that, for consumer products, I'm sure there are people that would love to have that option. And so knowing how you get in the door at Google and get it into their environment is probably the trade secret that he has. And
Well, Google loves this stuff, right? And they want to have the most innovative, fun stuff to play with, So that was really, he had lots of connections too, so
yeah, exactly.
I'm sure that helped. But,
Kaiser has a lab down in Fremont, and if you don't know that you have to go there, but if you're going to get something into the Kaiser environment, you have to get it through their lab.
Right.
And so you have to have a contact there or some way to get it into their startup test kind of setup. And so, those kind of intelligence things that really help, it seems.
Yes and no. Certainly they can help very much, but I also think that a lot of as engineers, we're often intimidated by not having a connection. But, if you have the right product at the right price and you know who you're targeting, usually people will want to listen, right? They'll see an opportunity, they'll be excited about it. And it's hard to present right, but if you really know that stuff really well and you can message it right, you can say, hey, you are exactly what I'm looking for, and this is why. Then the connections in today's day and age, you know, it's a few LinkedIn jumps away. I'll tell you a little LinkedIn trick I've been doing is, I just go through and add everyone who's relevant. Spend a few minutes, just connect. And pretty quickly I've gone from 1,200 to almost 3,000 contacts, I think, in the last 3 months, maybe. And so now, when I need to look for a contact, I've got like 60 shared contacts with that person, or something like that. And now when I reach out, it's like, oh wow, we know everybody together, and it's a really easy in. So it's funny, another media can be a lot harder to connect, but LinkedIn is very open to just, hey, connect, reach out, just not on the main page. It's harder to search. There's a barrier, but their recommendations, you just keep connecting. And if you specify, if you're looking for marketing people, connect with all the marketing people that show up, and then it will show you more marketing people. So, little digging trick. Okay, so some of the common mistakes of design feasibility is that you get into this never-ending cycle of design changes. So, what we're going to talk about right now, the impact of the design on the cost and some of these common mistakes. So, this is very common. You're going to get feedback from customers. You're going to think, oh, this needs to change. This needs to be better. Again, every design change has this domino effect, and it's not apparent usually immediately, but it's there. And especially earlier stage, that's where you want to do all the tinkering. And once you get closer and closer to production, you really want to confine those changes. Make sure, kind of like with the intro motion, try to confine those changes from changing the rest of the product, and really make sure they're worth it, right? Because most likely they are not going to be the difference, whether the customer buys a product or not. And that's the only difference that is important, really. I mean, it's good to have good reviews, but fundamentally, as a startup at the stage, you want to get sustainable and get to that point. So, again, responding to customer design changes too quickly. And then making design changes without considering the impact of the manufacturing process and costs. I'm consulting for a Korean company right now, and they have a great product. It's a new kind of evacuation system, and they have a core technology and algorithm that is their value proposition. But they're having a hard time. They've been having a little bit of a hard time selling the product. So they've gone out, and malls want one thing, and makerspaces want another thing, and subways want another thing. And so every time they heard about that, they went and made a new product. And so they have 12 products that they're not really fully selling right now. And
it's hardware based as well.
And they're hardware based and software based. And
That seems crazy to do for just software. But the hardware, yeah, so the hardware can go.
So it's just a lot. It is so much to try to figure out, because the design is the easy part, right? The product is 3 to 5%. You got to put all of that behind it. So really get one product right first, especially if you're raising investment. Investors, they want to see you do one thing well first. They want to see you make sales first with one product, and really not focus at all on another product until you do that. And they like very focused depth. Some of the best practices, if you can establish design-free states, I think it's better theory than practice. I think more importantly is freeze whatever you can, whenever you can. And certainly, once you understand that your product can make you sustainable, then freeze and go, manufacture it and sell. Establish cost targets for your product at system and component levels. Again, as much as you can. get that feedback early, get the quotes. There's a bit of a process to that, which we'll go through in more detail. Track the design changes to determine how it's going to affect your process adjustments. Determine if those changes require different materials. Determine if they require new investment. So, fundamentally just try to look at all of these different changes that can happen, and these are a bit of the list of them. Does it require any capital equipment? Does it change the assembly process? Okay, it can change packaging, it can change shipping, it can change duties. You can have a whole list of where your costs are coming from. Look at all of those costs and see how any design change might impact one or all of those things. Here's an example of kind of high fixed costs versus high variable costs in these different fields. So facilities, you can buy, build, or install them versus you can use contract manufacturers. Product you can manufacture in-house, you can license other products, R&D you can do in-house or you can outsource. Operations, fixed or variable, sales channels, direct or using distributors, customer relationships using your own CRM or working with distributors. Obviously, salary versus contract employees or getting patents on everything or trying to use other strategies to keep your IP safe. So it's kind of a list. Any questions in particular about this stuff? I think fundamentally the takeaway here is there's lots of options, especially in today's day and age. A lot of things can be outsourced and can be converted into variable costs, which is great for startups and really leverage that.
What do you mean by global patent? I mean, there's not a process, right? You have to hit every country and do it yourself.
Yeah. This was again from the module. There is no global patent. There are agreements between countries, so you can get, the EU has agreements between a lot of those countries, so you can get a patent that works for those. Once you get a US patent, it can be very easy to kind of copy and paste that to other countries and get early acceptance. But yeah, most countries, you actually have to get individual patents.
So you have a lot of experience with China. What's the deal with IP in China?
Yeah, it's getting very interesting. I mean, I'd say we're at a tipping point right now. Chinese, the domestic market is really becoming impressive, and China knows it needs to become more innovative as a country, so they are enforcing IP much more than they ever were. Their legal system is improving overall. Trademarks actually are really good in China right now because they're so simple to approve. And so if you're producing product with a Chinese factory, definitely get a trademark. We do it for $300. I think if you do it yourself, it's $180, something like that. It's cheap. And then you have it in the books if a competitor or if your factory makes your product. So in a tool, if you put your logo in the tool, fairly difficult to take that out. So if they make that product, they get it to the port, you can see what's on the port. There's programs that you can use to see what's being shipped. If you see something that potentially fits your product description, you can have them check it out. To date, I've never seen our network knock off the design.
So is that a qualified network, or how do you qualify your manufacturing?
There's a number of things that are at play there, I think. It's definitely qualified, right? We work with these guys, we develop personal relationships. Since we're working with lots of companies, we're funneling them more than one product, and so there's more value certainly in that relationship with us. We work with pretty much only Chinese speaking. The biggest thing is they can't market the product. China is very good at manufacturing, very bad at, especially U.S. market. There's no focus the street, everyone knows what it is, what it does. And if you can sell it for $200 instead of $600, it's really easy to sell. If you're trying to sell a live action cricket game, it's a whole different story, right? And so since our products are really startup products, that are usually take some education, take some market build up, it can be it's usually very difficult for our factories to do it. We've had American companies knock our products off, we've had Taiwanese companies knock our products off. Usually, my fundamental view is that, if you can't compete with a Chinese factory selling your own product, how are you going to compete with the big American players, right? If you don't have IP, if you don't have a brand and a strategy, everyone's going to knock off your product, and it's legal.
So proprietary trade secrets just means not exposing yourself to anyone, trying to keep it undercover until you go to market?
Yeah, again, this was from the module, so I don't want to read too much into this, but, fundamentally, what I would say, there's lots of strategies, right? And building a strong brand, building the right partnerships. There are a lot of companies that have gotten by without patents that have made successful models out of their business. One thing, if you have an issue there, you really want to move quickly or make a lot of money fast, and look for an acquisition or look to work with a major player and try to quickly get them to protect your IP with their brand and their lawyers and everything else. But it definitely needs to be a part of your strategy. Even if you have a patent, if a big company wants to sell your product, you're not going to win. Okay? You're not going to have $500,000 laying around to take to court, unless you have a great product and it's very clear and you really built up to that well. But fundamentally, even patents, it only allows you to sue people. And unless you want to, take Microsoft or Apple or someone to court, it's not going to be very useful. The flip side, the balancing factor of that is those companies don't care about your product until you're selling $100 million, at least $10 million. So you're not a blip for them until you get to that stage, and they're these behemoths that have to spend a ton of money to onboard a new product, typically, so they don't want to worry about it until there's another circumstance. All right, so typically, overall summing up kind of advice, really try to keep it simple. It will get complex all by itself. You don't need to worry about that part. Get to sales, customers, and sustainability first, and then you'll have lots of opportunity to reduce costs. In my mind, really try to outsource as much as you can. High variable costs at the beginning, low fixed costs. If you get to marketing sustainable with that model, then you can invest in the fixed costs, raise the investment, lower those variable costs, and then you can really start scaling and make money. You must compete on innovation. So you need to be able to compete with those higher variable costs pretty much in any case. And if you can't compete at the that higher margin, my advice would be step back now before you've invested a couple years and a ton of money in trying that model and see what you can tweak, see if there's a different market, if there's a different customer, if there's a different design that can get you to where you are competing on the innovation side and not on the cost side.
So perhaps this question flies in the face of the advice, but it feels to me like that the advice is accept the fact that you're going to have a lower margin for some period of time until you get the traction and the sustainability to build a business and begin to get the better margin with either more efficient designs or higher production runs, which take advantage of cost efficiencies, etc. As opposed to the possibility of a higher price, keeping the margin the same, you being able to reduce the price of the inventory with the business?
Yeah, so, well, I would say you do want to compete at a higher price. Right? If you have innovation relative to your competition, you should be able to demand a higher price. So, on the design and product side, everything else being equal, your cost should be similar. Right? So, yeah, you should have this extra margin, but then you're going to give up a good bit of that margin because you haven't paid for the tools. You're going to outsource to experts a lot of the work that you're not an expert at doing yourself, and you don't have the large team to do yourself. So that's going to push your margin down. And you know, in the beginning, you really are not looking at it. You're not going to. You're going to lose for a while because you have been spending all your money on R&D, on engineering, on some tooling. And so even when you sell products, you're really just looking to prove that you can sell products at a reasonable price that can eventually make a lot of your income. And once you can do that, then you work on that margin again. But you need to have enough room there so that you can absorb all of that, those costs to work with the experts, do the engineering, do all of this stuff that's very expensive at the beginning in order to get there. And if you're below that, then you're really good stuff.
So I guess maybe we're getting to realize that perhaps I'm misinterpreting the definition of profit margin. So what is,
Yeah.
in that model that you just articulated, what's the basic calculation of profit?
I mean, it's revenue versus cost, right? So, and per piece.
Per piece.
Yeah.
So I guess where I struggle with understanding is, so we have, for example, two incomes, which in our cost model would be amortized as through some proportion, we would amortize it across the number of units that we're producing. So is the cost of that tooling amortization part of the profit margin calculation, or is it?
I mean, that's really considered a fixed cost.
Okay, so you're talking variable costs, as we were talking about earlier, profit margin being less excluding the fixed costs that then build up for your company
Yeah.
to your company's profit margin,
Yeah.
which is thin in the beginning.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, this gets a bit into that fuzzy area with the semi-variable costs, right? You want to have money to spend on marketing, especially. This is where a lot of hardware companies do not spend that money. But, you know, that marketing budget is kind of a semi-variable cost, right? Or at least part of its profit margin equation. It is that you need to spend that money to sell that extra product. And if you know, my suggestion is, you know, if you have some profit margin there, spend it. Get your name out there. Get it in front of people. Build awareness. And you're gonna, whatever happens, you're gonna have this valley of death. The valley of death is your balance sheet. Right? You're gonna go to the red because you're gonna be spending money on all this expensive stuff before you make sales, before you make money. And where that valley really starts is basically when you pay for tooling. Is that you have prototyping costs, you have these other costs, but once you kind of confirm your design and you pay for that tooling, you're cool. And then you spend all the money on the first production run, bigger roll. And now you wait 3 months, you pay for shipping, packing, duties, and fulfillment. And finally you ship a product, ship a product down a little more for shipping. And whoever, if you're probably going through a distributor, and they may have 68 terms or depends on what we work out with them, but there's gonna be some lag out there. And then finally, you're gonna start putting back up again. And, so you want to be pretty, you're gonna be going down in this hole, so you want to make sure that when you're able to sell a product, you're able to start climbing back up.
You can finally cover a break-even point somewhere in the hopefully not too distant future.
And then, if you need to make changes, if you spend a little bit more on marketing, everything about the business is going to be crunching your margin. So if you don't have some space, it's not uncommon for hardware startups to sell a product at a loss.
It's never be covered.
No business. All right, I think we are at coffee break. Let me go through this real quick. So I'm not sure where they got this graph from. I like it in its simplicity. I think I would move it back to the left slightly, but it really makes the point. The first units are really expensive. As you get into more standardized manufacturing technologies, they bottom out. I really like their quote here though that there's a misconception that it's all about volume. A big reason why it looks like this is not just because these units go up, but because as you manufacture more production runs and learn the technology and get the design right, and you have a really focused effort on doing that, then that's how you lower this cost. It doesn't just kind of magically happen where you say, hey factory, make more, and you might only see 5-10% reduction in material costs and some other things with that volume. And so to get to numbers like this, what happens is that concerted effort to improve the product for manufacturing. This is just one note on power benchmarking that it can be a little bit hard to estimate the cost, but a valuable thing is if there's a competitor, you can buy that product, you can open it up, you can look at, hey, all of those parts, you might see some interesting little features in there that don't make sense that you didn't think about that might give you some insights to safety or durability or something that you might not be thinking about. You can back out kind of their component costs and you can see how that relates to their price, and you can try to understand more about all of these things, the manufacturing assembly cost, performance. Definitely, as much as you can, stand on the shoulders of giants, right? You use what is around you. Nobody's reinventing the wheel, right? We've got to use the best resources we can about what's available. All right, well, lots of good discussion. Let's take a quick break. That took a little bit longer than I was thinking, which is great. I think, so let's take 10 minutes and then take a bathroom break and we'll get going with the rest here.
Membrane separation.
Do you want to introduce yourself? Actually, we did a little bit of a round introduction. Here's where we're starting.
I'll come up here so let's turn backwards. I'm Jonathan Gibbs. Running a hardware company where we're building a precast grade aircraft. Right now we're just building a small prototype out of iGate. I guess the unique thing is that our aircraft can be flown remotely, so we're hoping to make distance travel, schedulable distance travel accessible. We think the last thing you can't schedule in your life is an airline ticket, especially the dentist, because everything else. But yeah, we're just starting out with kind of a very small seat ground. We're aircraft designers, kind of like architects of airplanes. And so that was our background at Boeing. So we're learning all about the business side and how to plan for these different expensive things and be able to perform with very high stakes. And so we're happy to be here to learn about the processes and the case studies that we're doing. Yeah. Cool.
And what is the pitch of your seating arrangement?
Pitch? So we give you about, so I know what it is in meters. So it's half a meter wide. So it's a little bit wider than the airline seat. It's about 1.6 meters long, so not quite long enough for you to sleep, but much longer than you were getting with airmen. Well, that's exactly what we said. We've got better seats than Boeing airlines. We're running maybe then it sets of 3, so it sets of 100. So you can schedule. So somebody's going to pull the Delta plane if he wants to be part of it. You can pull a mark and you can run it. So that's kind of the idea.
Okay, so the rest of the talk here, we're going to really get down to nuts and bolts. I'm going to go very fast. I should say nuts and bolts of theory in a lot of these different areas. So I'm going to give a pretty broad swath here. I'm going to go pretty quick given that the first part took a little bit longer than I expected. So again, just encourage you guys, if there's something interesting that you want me to really dig into more, let me know. This stuff is really the details, and everything I'm going to talk about, there's a million details behind it, and I think the internet and a lot of online resources are fundamentally better at looking at the particular details for your product and your process. So I'll try to keep it a bit high level here, but yeah, please feel free to interject. So,
You by chance know the Wi-Fi password?
I do not.
Okay, that's okay. Yeah, don't hold up your class with it.
So material selection, is obviously part of the key. Materials usually drive the process, which drives cost and so forth. It makes a big difference between success and failure. Often it's going to affect your time to produce as well as the cost, performance and adaptability, the look, feel, and sense, the fundamental of your brand, the reliability, and also the environmental impact. Spending that time in the beginning to figure out the right materials can really go a long way. So this, I really veer off from what they have in Module 3, when that's available. That module goes a lot more into, I'd say, technical theory of the materials. What I've done here is to just give you a lot of examples from what I've seen in my experience in kind of trying to generalize between the broad scope of materials. So when you look at materials, you want to look at the different processes that can be applied to those, and those together will determine tooling costs, production costs, and so forth. These are some of the processes that are most common in metals. In all of these, there's quite a few processes I haven't listed. What I've listed, at least in my experience, are really the common processes that we use. So, any questions about that?
Difference between stamping and die stamping?
Oh, very little. Yeah, sorry. I guess I just had that on there twice.
What is deep trauma?
This is hard. I was hoping no one would ask this. It's a very, very cool process. I'm not sure how to explain it, but I haven't seen it for a while. But you start, you really should YouTube this because it's pretty hard to explain. But it basically makes, it can make bottles. It can make interesting shapes with a cavity. And you basically have this tool that has like a lip into it, and you push the material in, and it forms almost like pottery, kind of the metal into usually cylindrical type shapes. Yeah, much easier to visualize if you have the video than it is to explain. So. But not, that probably shouldn't be on there. That's actually not a very common process at all. It's pretty easy. Metal, so rough costs and process tips. They typically use cheaper tooling. It's a lot of kind of 2D types of processing, typically extrusion and cutting, bending and cutting. And a lot of that tooling can be softer, which is usually the determining factor on how expensive the tool is. The quotes that we usually get for metal, for tools for metal processes are in the hundreds of dollars to low thousands. The materials costs are usually pretty significant. It can vary greatly, obviously, if you're working with titanium, something's valid versus very cheap steel. One thing certainly that we've experienced in China is that what is claimed as a raw material is often not what we receive. It's very hard to get true stainless steel and you get rust problems. And so we really want to do, I think America and the US will be much better at that. Overseas, you want to make sure you do the inspection on your incoming material. The minimum, so MOQ is minimum order quantity, and the processes are typically more lenient, but there's still a good bit of setup time required. We typically see MOQs around 1,000 pieces. One thing about MOQs, it's really relative to price, fundamentally. And basically you need to make it worth the factory's while to put in the time to make a run. You think of the factory, there's a boss who's, well, depending on who you're working with, but you look at the economics of the factory. If it's a bigger company, they've got a lot of overhead, they're going to need a larger order size. But fundamentally, it takes a long time to set up, to get all the documents, review all the documents, get the line set up, train the workers, build the tools, figure out the inspection process. At the MOQ, most factories are losing money. Understand that, respect that. It helps a lot if you can be appreciative to the factory and show them that respect, that you understand that they're kind of taking a risk and gamble on you. It goes a long way to getting their buy-in for future products. But fundamentally, they're usually kind of trying to cover costs to make that make sense, and it's a lot of work to get started. So if you're spending $10,000 or more dollars, you're probably relatively safe that they're going to be able to cover their costs. Less than that, it starts to become questionable. So, we have unit sizes here, but dollar amounts in some ways are a better measure of if you're just trying to ballpark what the MOQ would be and you're not sure. Set up typically, if you've ever worked in a machine shop, it's not too much different except just on more manufacturing size tools that requires some kind of, this would be jig or fixture on a machine, and setting up the raw stock in the line, getting the workers trained to manage that material. It's typically fairly labor intensive. These factories are also fairly dirty, so nowadays more and more we're combining different kinds of materials together. So if you need a clean product, you don't want your finishing assembly and so forth in the metal factory probably. You want it in the electronics or the packaging factory or somewhere that is typically kept a lot more clean. I put in here kind of the result consistency, which is a little bit hard to measure, but is fundamentally usually based on the amount of labor required. There's always human error when humans are involved, and typically in metal processes there's a bit more handiwork. But there's also tooling that helps balance that. So I'd say the overall output of the consistency of what you're getting is about medium as processes go. One thing about metals is surface finishes are usually very important to aesthetics and functionality. So you can change a lot of thermal conductivity or the visual appearance and so forth with some surface finishes, and most metals will have some kind of surface finish for us.
So, question, Greg. So these points, there's a few of them that kind of have a baseline assumption of the work being done in Asia, right? Primarily China. Is that right?
Yeah. This comes from me and my experience, so there is some of that. But is there anything in particular that you're?
Well, because I remember in one of the videos I watched, they were talking about onshore versus offshore, and in some cases where I guess some Chinese companies would have operations onshore for prototyping, maybe in small production runs here in the U.S. When you get proven, if you will, quote unquote, you can, and ready for longer, higher quantities, you move that offshore. So I guess I'm just thinking about things like the bait and switch. Well, that would be primarily in doing any kind of inspection, that would be if you start your work offshore.
Yeah. Yeah, especially this one is definitely, I think, much less relevant here. I think all the others are pretty consistent on the sites. They're probably a bit cleaner here, but the process itself is just kind of dirty. There's no holes can fly anywhere.
So I know this kind of depends on the parts that you're making, but what is like the usual setup time to figure out the software you're going to use in the process to if someone's like trying to make any part?
So, you know, it is much more relevant to the queue in the factory than it is the actual setup time of the process. So, you know, these, for metal, you know, this probably takes, if everyone's focused and moving, 10, 20 minutes, you know, it can be pretty quick. You carry some materials out, you put the fixture on machines, and that can be pretty quick. But you probably have to wait 2 weeks in line because the factories always want to be busy. And you know, the worst thing for a factory is to not have an order. Right? So they want longer queues. You know, they obviously also realize they have to have a really decent turnaround time. But you usually probably 70-80% of the lead time that you're quoted is often the queue. It's not actually the processing time. So, you know, in our experience, we typically work with smaller factories in China, which partly because they are faster, because they have a less queue, smaller queue, and because we can get a little bit more priority there. And you know, with us on a production run, you know, I'd say it's usually about a week and a half to kind of wait in line, and then it's usually a week to produce and QC the parts in a very rough ballpark. So plastics, some of the common processes: injection molding, blow molding, rotomolding, extrusion, thermoforming, and compression molding. Obviously, the injection molding is by far and away the most common, and it's also a little bit more unique. Most of these others, all of these others, the tooling is much cheaper. Injection molding really requires very hard steel, at least in large quantities. The tools we make typically last about 300,000, 500,000 units. All tools require maintenance. That's an important thing to know. If you leave them lying around too long, they can rust, they can wear down if you're not taking care of them. The hardness of the tool will require less maintenance to get the same kind of performance. So, besides just increasing the lifetime of the tool, that's also an important balance. Factories might not tell you that; they will likely make the tool for free. But if you have problems with the factory, if there's a dispute or some other thing that could be important to take into consideration. So injection molding tools are typically quite expensive. You know, for smaller parts, they can be down to maybe about $3,000. For larger, more complex tools, it can be $25,000. They can be more expensive certainly, but this is, let's say, rough range for different products behind a lot. The benefit obviously is that the result is the production and material costs are quite low. This is why everything's about it made out of plastic injection molding, is your variable costs go down to about the cheapest product that we can manufacture effectively. At least for intricate parts, right? You get pretty good tolerances with injection molded parts. The MOQs as such are higher because it takes quite a bit of time to set up the machine. So we get a lot of customers coming to us, and you always want to make 300. It's a great number. You want to get to market, you want to test the market, you want to get it out to 300 people, and you get a lot of answers to your questions. Unfortunately, it's like the worst number. It's the best number for marketing, it's the worst number for manufacturing. And nobody has solved that problem. It's not going to be solved for quite a while, even with so many people kind of promising and suggesting it. Usually, getting to that number is still using prototyping technologies, and so it's still going to be relatively expensive. But the reason why it's so hard in injection molding is that it takes time to set up the machine and a lot of material to get a true injection molded part that is conforming. You have to take off the old tool. Those tools are very expensive. They usually require a crane to remove from the machine. So you get a couple workers, crane, undo it, take it off, store it correctly, grab a new one, crane, put it on the machine, tighten it up, heat the machine up to steady state. Then you need to clear out the material from the barrel and the hopper to get to steady state again with the shrinkage and the cooling effects, especially the color. Any little remnant of a black piece of plastic when you're trying to make red will make an unacceptable product according to what is probably your pretty strict color requirement. So that can take a half hour, usually. In all that time, you're running material through the machine, and all of that material cannot be used for anything. It can be reground, and you can maybe get up to 50% regrind or so into a product, but the higher the percent of regrind, the more brittle the material will be. So it's only good for darker, cheaper products. So trying to just beg the factory, hey, just throw it on there, make me 300. If you, let's say you have an 8-cavity tool, all right, let's say it's a minute per cycle, right? So since you have paid for, you're making about 500 pieces an hour, right? So you put it on there. If it takes you kind of 2 hours to set up, you basically spent the time, energy, and material costs to make 1,000 pieces that got you to zero. Making another 500 now that it's all set up just really doesn't make any economic sense. You might as well make a couple thousand while everything's ready. So that's kind of the basis of where these comes from.
So typically that would be for your piece parts, is that correct?
Yeah.
Pre-assembly.
Yeah.
So let's say that marketing wants 300. So that's my sweet spot for understanding whether or not, understanding all the demand issues. We go to the manufacturer, we find out from a cost setup point of view that 3,000 is the minimum quantity that cover the cost. So we produce 3,000 pieces. Now we've got inventory to see if we assemble 3,000 finished goods. But do I understand correctly that we don't want to build 3,000 finished goods units? We want to, if in fact we actually are willing to spend money for the 3,000 piece parts. and we don't want to spend the money because we haven't finished with it.
Right.
Can we inventory those remaining, 27 minute parts or whatever, until we know that we need them, and potentially throw them away?
Absolutely. Absolutely. When you're making 3,000 or 5,000, when you make them at a steady state level, they shouldn't be that expensive. If you've got, a processor in there or some other expensive electronics that you can order 50 of or 100 of, absolutely. Go ahead and make those 3,000, keep them in a box, safe somewhere. We do this all the time. This is our value as a company, is that we offer that kind of service to work with startups that way. It can be more difficult. Factories typically, they want to make all of your stuff to order and get it shipped. Yeah, they don't want to be keeping track of stuff. It can get broken, it's responsible.
But often you're going to ship it, they are going to ship it to a separate single site, maybe not theirs, maybe a 3PL or whatever. It's going to actually do the assembly. So with that organization, it would still be yet offshore, right? As opposed to importing all those piece parts. So there is some organization somewhere that would inventory those remaining parts.
Yeah, definitely. And, at this stage too, you're probably, you're still just trying to make stuff work. And so you have to work with your partners and figure out what works best with your current situation. But it's a great way to save money, and definitely highly recommend it. Just the only caveat I would say is that when they're stored, they can get lost, they can get damaged. So just be careful with storing them in a place where they will be in their usable state. You're able to use them.
So that's what Berkeley Sourcing Group does?
Yeah, we're high service style contract manufacturer. So yeah, we take care of basically from A to Z, from DFM all the way to shipped product, and really offering all the extra services like that to make startups businesses work.
Right. So getting to that level, you're talking about you've already got your prototyping. And so what I've seen before though is the prototyping process itself requires materials. And so we typically, what I've seen is going and looking for someone who can do a soft mold and try to get cheaper turnaround for lower quantities and that kind of stuff. And I also hear about going inland in the States where there's fab shops in Central America, Central US that are underutilized and begging for jobs. And so those all things you guys consider, or are you pretty much focused on the cheaper market turnaround for a higher volume?
Well, we're all in China, basically. So we have lots of partners, and not just with Workers Sourcing Group, but with Harbor Massive. So Fictive and the guys who come on board, in various 3D printing, milling. There's definitely a lot of options here. We can connect with those resources. We're really all about design for manufacturing and forward, so we don't get. We'll look at pre-production prototypes to confirm manufacturing, but earlier stage is not our wheelhouse. We're very focused on.
Yeah, that's typically the rub, is you're trying to prototype and you can't find anybody that's really willing to work with you until you get a product, right? Until you've got something that's ready to run. And so you're really struggling at times with prototyping support and building your own thing.
Yeah, that's more of the kind of industrial design firms. And there's a lot of options, but
even they'll tell you, come back when you get your box ready.
Yeah, well, you should, if you're hearing that, Harbor Massive could be a great resource, because those guys are all focused on supplying for the startup community.
Okay, thanks.
One question. So when you say that you have to install a new tool, how big is this tool?
But typically, about that big. They can be bigger, certainly, but it depends on the pressure of the machine you're using. Overall, though,
Still a couple 100 pounds.
150 pounds.
So for consumer hardware products, is it common and cost effective to like try and put like as many parts as you can as a result?
Yeah, so it's called a family tool, and it can be very cost effective. The only problem is that when you do that, you are kind of committing to making all of those same parts at the same time. So let's say potential problems is that if one part has a lot more defects than the other, but you need them all to go into one product, now all of a sudden you need that one part a lot more. You're limited by how many products you can make. You have all these extras of the others. You can plug things up and you can work some other tricks, but when you do that, you lose time and money, trying to work around it. So yeah, that's one of the kind of tricks of the trade.
So when you're designing for the tool, you guys kind of like know which parts will have problems with the tool?
Yeah. I mean, for the most part, they shouldn't. Over at least in small quantities. It's when you get into hundreds of thousands potentially where you start to see that imbalance. But yeah, we'll kind of going a little bit further in this, but typically products will break in certain ways. The thinner materials, the more sophisticated part. FMEA is a whole science. It's focused on understanding that. So it's a relatively low labor requirement, especially here in the U.S. Robots do most of the work now. It's very consistent output, which is great. And the one thing is there's usually no surface finish on injection molding. Texture can be important, and it's something we want to think about and define. This is all primarily for injection molding, since that's the most common. The other processes are, again, much cheaper. Tooling costs typically lower MOQs, typically a little bit higher on the variable costs, but all very different. Those are all very different processes overall. Electronics are pretty simple. Basically you print a board. Fundamentally, you add the components onto the board. You put the board in the housing and connect some wires, usually the power or to other electronics. The nice thing is, it's once you get the tool made, it's very simple and very consistent. The driving factor is usually the component cost. So certainly for most sophisticated components, the component cost can be both very expensive and lead times can be very long. So when you're designing your electronics, check the sophisticated components and check on the lead times as well as the cost. Some of these can have a 12-week lead times. Some cannot be available in certain markets where you want to produce. Some might be about to be discontinued. So really want to look at where that component is and how it will be. We typically see MOQs around 1,000, potentially less. It's a little bit less cost intensive to set up the machine. Again, low labor requirement and very high consistency of the product. Any questions?
So these are, we're talking PC board assembly,
Yeah.
typically mostly automated these days.
Yeah.
From a stuffing and soldering point of view.
Yeah. Even the lowest level factors, I think, are resolved.
Are there any factories that do dual components? Because I think most factories just do like surface mounts. And have you worked with anyone who does like dual components and you just like solder around?
Yeah, not so much. Yeah, it's basically SMT has really taken over in our experience. I'm not really the electronics guy though, so I should take that with a grain of salt. But in our experience, it's basically all SMT. Glass is an interesting one. So the float process makes flat glass panes. Then there's machine blown and hand blown are the main processes. Kind of the main point I wanted to make is that if you want a machine blown glass, then usually the MOQs start, if you're lucky, at about 50,000. Hand blown obviously can be harder to control, and if that's a critical element in your design, then that can be difficult. So glass overall, it's got some great properties. It can be very cheap if you can order like 50,000, but it's typically a very difficult kind of material to work with for startups. I wouldn't, and I love the concept of hand blown. They're very good overall. They're very cool looking. They can make some very interesting shapes and do it, in my mind, surprisingly consistently, and not actually for that expensive, $2 or so for some pretty interesting things. But I don't know, how you fit that in your design is a little bit challenging. Fabrics, there are many processes that are involved in fabrics, but the real common one, basically cut and sew. These factories are cut and sew factories, and I'm a big fan of fabrics for startups when it works. Having a clean tech background here a little bit more. It's not typically used or very useful in clean tech, but there's almost no fixed costs, or very little fixed costs in any case. You can do very low MOQs. You can make 300 pieces of fabric product, no problem. There's training involved. There is quite a bit of variation because it is so labor intensive. But if you can, get into that sustainability point, if you can do something with fabric to prove a concept, to prove some market viability, definitely something to consider if at all possible.
Can you give us an example of
Yeah, one that we make that incorporates fabric and TPU is a backrest cushion. Obviously bags and there's I can't think of anything super innovative. It's a good prototyping technology along with foam. You can make decent structure with some fabric and some foam. It'd be pretty cool. Okay, wanted to kind of switch gears and talk about how to work with contract manufacturers. And I'm going to fly through this part since we're running out of time here. Going along with the idea of keeping your fixed costs low and getting to market quickly, it can definitely be the fastest way to scale. The nice thing is, without having to build up your own team, you can basically onboard decades of experience of engineers and workers and so forth with basically no extra cost to help you identify and improve a lot of the stuff that we're talking about today. It helps you keep your team focused on really development, raising money, and sales. And it can really be really helpful in this initial stage where you're trying to get this guidance, the quotes, the results that you need out of the first product and getting to market. Working with these manufacturers, the key thing that you need to do is define the product. The best way to define the product is with these documents. The product requirements document, if you're not ready to do what we did in ProMotion and engineer every part and figure out every detail, then the best thing you can do is tell the factory what your market expects out of the product. And they can have a lot of that insight almost naturally without a lot of work a lot of times. that requires them to really understand what needs to be made done and to explain that clearly. Bill of materials, technical files, prototype, and inspection guidelines, all the these in more detail. So the product requirements document basically describes those expectations of the product in the market, and it helps account for the things that may be very difficult for you to quantify in the design. So if you can explain, hey, where is it going to be used? Is this an outdoor product? Is it an indoor? Is it going to be wet? Are kids going to play with it? Does it need to be food safe? How durable does it need to be? If you can explain these things, at least in layman's terms, and hopefully more, it's a great guide for a contract manufacturer to work with. Is everyone familiar with the BOM? It's important because it's a complete list, and as in a bird's eye view, it really communicates a lot of information very quickly, and it's a good baseline for everyone staying on the same page. Definitely want to create a separate mechanical and electrical BOM if you have both in your product. The electrical BOM in particular is great in that you can just add a part number instead of having to go and specify every detail of what that component needs to be. Your factory looks up the part number and they have everything they want more very quickly. It also allows for a good potential review for cost reduction, for improving the design, having all that information. So fundamentally, in a BOM, there's different ways to look at it. I suggest part name, part number, material, units per product, and then maybe some simple notes. If there's a number of threads per screw or something with voltage that wasn't included. But you don't want the BOM to be too complex. You want it to be a nice, readable document that mostly makes sure that all the components are covered. Then you can explain the usage of the product requirements document in more details, the technical files.
Two questions. Yep. One is partner with internal partner or industry standard partner?
Industry standard. It's a good question, and it can be both. It can be either, it can be both, but if it's internal, it just needs to communicate.
You would then be able to refer to what the industry partner. Okay, that's question one. Question two is, does it also include, should it include, from the very top, meaning a particular SKU which contains packaging and documentation and then actual user finished goods, and then download from finished goods. So does it include the packaging and everything included in that, or is it how do you make the item?
Yeah, no, it usually doesn't. That being said, we prefer over communication. As long as it's not miscommunication, we have no problem flipping through hundreds of pages of documentation, as long as that is all correct and relevant. Where we struggle the most is lack of information or miscommunication. So I don't think it's really an issue unless your contract manufacturer is pushing back to over-communicate. As long as it's somewhat effectively done, well formatted, makes sense, and it's all true. If that packaging is not the same anymore, then that can be a real problem. Okay, so the technical files, fundamentally these are 2D files, 3D files, and Gerber files. Those are the three most common, but these are in many ways the heart and soul of the details, especially for your custom products. I think there's a little bit too much reliance on 3D files alone. Is that it's great. It does show all of the details in a way that you can look at it, but it's actually, it can be very hard to pull out tolerances and specific dimensions critical elements of the design. So when there are more critical elements, it's great to take a 2D cutout of that and explain that separately. And you can make some more notes on a 2D file to explain surface finish. You can call out certain dimensions and tolerances. And, so you can use that 2D file as a little bit more of a magnifying glass to better explain some of the details in the 3D file. For metals, often you don't need a 3D file actually. There are a lot of 2D kind of processes where you can explain everything very clearly, effectively in a 2D file. Some of the things with 3D files, there's a lot of great simulation software out there. Quick plug for ANSYS, they have a startup program now where they're offering really amazing tools for their normally very expensive simulation software for startups.
Who's that?
ANSYS, ANSYS. And one nice thing is with the 3D file and the material, like an injection molder can tell you immediately pretty much the cost of that part because they can weigh the amount of material in the part. A few other calculations and figuring out their runner and so forth, and that gets in there. So prototype. Sometimes maybe your product is fully defined in all of those other files, but even though it can be fully defined, people are so human that they need to, in their minds, convert all of that stuff on the computer and paper into real world physics and reality, and in that way, prototypes are valuable. Right? And even if usually your prototype is not going to be perfect as soon as you finished it, there was a design change like 2 seconds later that you wanted it to be in there, so it's always going to be out of date pretty much. Don't worry so much about that. Send that prototype over. The best thing you can do is to explain, hey, these are all the things I really like about this prototype. This is what we're thinking of changing. This is what we have to change. This is what we like to change. Just have a good, deep conversation or explanation of that prototype. So when you send it, don't just send it alone and expect the engineers to kind of magically come up with what you are hoping to get to, but take the time, really detail out what you're trying to communicate and where you're trying to go with that. Quality. So main point I want to make here is that the responsibilities. Right? You can come up with a fancy, expensive contract. At the end of the day, it's very simple. That your responsibility is to define exactly what needs to be made, including the tolerances. And the manufacturer's responsibility is to produce exactly what has been specified within tolerance. And as complicated as things can get with those contracts, reality is very simple. If you told them to make one thing, or if you didn't have enough information, then you really didn't do your job, because they can only make what you have specified them to make. And if you did do all that and they didn't make it, or they didn't communicate back to you that that wasn't what they were supposed to make, then really it's on them, right? And then you could and should push back. And even if you have a contract, most of these relationships are really big, in many ways personal relationships at the end of the day. If they care about your business, if they want your business, they want you to be happy, vice versa. You're gonna have a lot of things that you're working out with them all the time, and at the end of the day, this is what you need to do in good faith and kind of agree on with them. So the other thing about this is that when you get all of this defined, you want to keep it in one package, and you want to keep the current version. When there are changes, you need to update that version. I really like bare bones systems. Everybody knows Excel, everybody knows Word, everyone can open these files, and they're easy to communicate, where you can move them around. There's lots of sophisticated versions of doing this these days, and some may fit your needs more, certainly, but whichever system you use, make sure that that package is confined clearly.
Sorry,
This one,
so just for precision, when you say update that version, I'm thinking what I'm understanding is make sure it's under version control and you introduce a new version when you change it, correct?
Yes, correct. Thank you. Sure. Absolutely. And so, when the factory is going to production, right, that's the key is, okay, here's the complete package. This is what everybody's going to be using. You have a design freeze at that point. Nobody makes any changes. And that way, your partner who's managing production and the factory boss is reviewing this, and the engineer at the factory is setting up the tool, and the worker at the factory, they're all getting their information from one place. Because there's a huge potential telephone game problem in manufacturing. When everything else is going well, and everything else is done well, where you see most of the problems is miscommunication or lack of communication. And that still happens quite a bit. Even, to me, I don't see these sophisticated systems solving that problem much. Because the more sophisticated they are, the less people know how to use them, the more training they take, the more the worker on the floor is maybe not using them. I do think it is improving, but it's not simple. As we were talking in the beginning, the quality in manufacturing is not the general goodness of the product. It's simply, is it acceptable or is it not acceptable? And this is really, really important concept. The idea is there is no such thing as perfection. Right? If you want something that is 1 inch in diameter, it will never be 1.00 infinity inches in diameter. There's always going to be some measure of imperfection. So what you need to do is define what that is and what is acceptable. As engineers, I think we like to be strict. As business people, you want to be as loose as you possibly can. Because the tighter it is, the more defects you're going to have, the more expensive it's going to be, the different, more expensive tools and processes you're going to have to use. So go back to your business plan, what your customer needs, make sure your customer is happy enough to buy the product. Once they are, loosen it up as much as you possibly can. I mean, sometimes you don't need to loosen up, but just because it's loose, a good manufacturing partner won't necessarily make it sloppy. Right? I mean, they should still be working as long as it's relatively easy to make a good product. You're all working together to make a good business. But if it can be loose, try to work with them to give them that flexibility, help them make a little more profit, and they'll do more for you. So in that regard, if you have no tolerances, you have no basis for quality. Plain and simple. These specifications need to be quantifiable for all of the characteristics of every component that could be important. Because if it isn't defined, it can't be measured, and your factory has done their job to make it according to your specs, and it didn't meet your customer satisfaction. So if it is important to your customer, make sure you define it and get it into that engineering package. Once you have that, once you have this engineering package with all of the specifications and tolerances, you have a big translation job to translate that into what can be inspected. And that's a totally different process, uses totally different tools. It's like manufacturing again, almost. It's much simpler, definitely, but it's a totally different system. And so what you want to do is you want to look at, you need to quantify it as much as it possibly can be. And then you want to measure it as quantifiable as it can be. Eyeballs are amazing tools. They're amazing at picking out color. They're amazing, you can see bubbles, you can see a lot of little things, you can count bubbles or other things in there. So that can be a tool. It's not the most quantifiable tool, but it can be the best tool available in a lot of cases. Obviously, some of the other tools in clean tech will be a lot more lab tools certainly required. Okay, durability and safety. So these are the really tough ones, and the reason is because they're often not as quantifiable, and they often result from unexpected circumstances. So after you've done these other things, you really want to take a step back and review your product independently for both durability and safety. And for durability, you want to focus on what's going to break first, things that are thinner, use softer materials, get bent more. Again, there's a whole science behind this, but we all have some intuition of what part is going to break. Focus on those, figure out if you beef up those parts a little bit, you can easily increase the lifetime of your product 3, 5, 10x. Safety, definitely, I don't know what more to say about that. There's FMEA, other tools out there can help a lot with that, but definitely stay focused on it. If you have a safety issue for people, it will likely kill your business unless you really will establish yourself. Any questions on that? All right, how are we doing? We are at 12:01, so I think I'll skip this example and just hit the main final thoughts here. So hardware really is hard. It's you're going to be most effective if you can respect that. Try to keep it as simple as possible and try to be realistic. As a founder, this is really where I've been getting to lately, is that you really, in the success stories that I've experienced and been a part of, and the more I learn about this path to market, I really become more and more convinced that you only really have time to do these 5 things. You need to define your value proposition fundamentally. You need to know fundamentally what your business is. You need to create the vision and refine it. And this is pretty broad. Understanding this DFM stuff is a part of this vision, certainly. But you need to create this forward momentum in a singular direction for your company. That's basically what happened there. You need to raise money. You need to build the right team. And then you need to do whatever it is you're best at, right? If you're an electrical engineer, you can be electrical engineering. If you're a marketing person, you can do marketing. But that's already going to be kind of a full-time job. You're going to be doing all of this other stuff on top of it. You're not going to have a whole lot of bandwidth. And that's, you're still going to be doing accounting. You're going to be the janitor. You're going to be doing all of this other stuff that is not part of these 5 things that you just have to do, that have to get done. So really try to limit your duties to these 5 things. And with manufacturing, with all that we've really discussed today, in my mind, the hardest part is defining the product well. If you can do that, in fact, you can find partners that can make it. And it's not too difficult, but very difficult, obviously. Fundamentally is related to materials, processes, and tolerances. So if you can define all of those things well, then you're going to be a very good chance for success. And just the final thoughts. Find help. Get team members, hardware teams with 2 people, are not generally very successful. 4 or 5, they have a much better chance of success typically. Find mentors and partners and providers who are experts. There's about 30 different disciplines that you're going to have to master if you want to compete with big companies. Tooling design, packaging, search engine optimization. A lot of these things that are a lot more than software. Software is really 3 or 4 things. So if you're trying, so many startups try to learn all of that, and without realizing that, wow, okay, you can learn tooling, you can learn mechanical engineering maybe a little bit, and then you can get your manufacturing down, but who's going to shoot the video, who's going to be reaching out to the customers, and who's going to make your brand guide, and all of those things. And so it just kind of, once you do realize that it's too late, and you spend all your time, all your money, you still have those 10 or 15 disciplines that didn't get done. So really suggest trying to find the right people that are already experts that can do it quickly, which can market effectively. DFM and manufacturing is definitely a particularly complex area. If you do that, and if you try to do it all in-house, it often leads to delays and mistakes. I highly recommend trying to find partners, people that are experts in this field. Even, we have this as a top description, but within manufacturing, you saw how many processes there are for metal and plastic. Within those processes, there's a lot of detail. So it really does take a decade or more of experience typically to build and we consider common in the market. At the same time, you need to understand those. You should always be learning and improving. So I think a great way to learn is, work with the experts, learn what they do, how they do it, why they do it. To me, that's much more effective than trying to go to Google and read about this stuff. There will be a lot of little details of your business that are important that you can learn very quickly with an expert explaining them, but maybe hidden 30 pages deep in Google would be very hard to find. So I think that's a good way to do it. And then as you do get better, as you grow, as you get more sustainable, you have revenues, you can build a team, you can start to cherry pick where you can save the money, where you can pull things in-house, very similar to the drum machine. All right, thank you guys.